Hello, my name is Dr. Philip Good. But since we're all friends here, you can call me Phil. Dr. Phil Good.
Inhaling the voice.
Now this is the most important part of the bel canto technique. It is known as the inhalation of the voice.
To inhale the voice.
To inhale breath.
Did you know that there's one vocal technique that can cover almost all the vocal techniques that you've ever studied?
It is known as the inhalation of the voice.
How are you today? I'm fine. To be or not to be, that is the question. And you practice until you don't leak.
Lamperti said that you should sing as if you were continuing to inhale breath.
Toilet paper you can hang over your head like this and just let it hang there. I think I did a video on that already.
We're trying to ensure that we're maintaining a little bit of this lateral expansion through a part of the vocal phrase.
It's a very pure sound. It's a very open space in your throat, but then at the same time, very narrow air passage.
By exhaling the voice, you eliminate the overtone, which produces the mellowness. In other words, I have two streams of breath involved here. This stream of breath that I'm sucking in, I do not think of as breath, I think of it as being my voice or my sound. That stream of breath in turn sucks the breath out of the lungs up into the head, where the two streams meet, okay?
The breath becomes energy in the body. The energy extends past your limbs and becomes fire.
And I used it many times in performances for some of the big things. I'm fine. To be or not to be, that is the question. You blow, you establish a degree of blow, and then you sort of imitate that, or you imagine that.
So that prevents the diaphragm from springing up and generating too high subglottal pressure, which then forces the larynx up, and then the throat starts to narrow. And the idea behind this is to avoid any kind of throat constriction.
Welcome to Mr. Opera, the home of new school singing. Today, we're gonna try to rescue old school singing. The shape you make with your lips when you sing at the end of your vocal tract is called the terminal opening in technical speak. And this system is a way to organize those. It's part of an overall system for notating and organizing the things that we might want to remember and be able to write down if we sing a lot of music. Pretty much in the same way that instrumentalists might write down their fingerings or their tonguings in their score, which you can see them do in the orchestra pit all the time. They have multiple options that will get them the same note, but not all of them will be as efficient. Now, last time we talked about an important and relatively new concept that isn't talked about enough in videos and books and other literature about singing, and that's called source filter nonlinearity. Now, in case you need a reminder, it's like a vocal version of the chicken and egg problem. By source filter nonlinearity, I mean that when you sing, the way that your vocal folds vibrate or oscillate is actually affected by the way that you resonate in your vocal tract, which is weird. Your larynx and your vocal folds are the source of the sound in the first place. So it's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? The whole thing is going in this kind of weird leaky loop instead of in a straight line. And that's not just mental imagery, that's physics. That's the acoustics of the vocal tract that you may not be learning at school or that you may not be learning from your teachers, because a lot of them just don't know about it.
It's called forced expiration because That's the amount of pressure or air force that you have to use to pressure the vocal folds to make a decent vibration. The problem that Inalare la voce addresses is that there is too much force. The forced expiration muscles need to be allowed to do its job. It has to push the air out. So if you're thinking, well, if that's the problem, why not just not push so hard? But then we know what's going to happen if you don't push. Then you're going to get sounds like this. You have to let your body force the air out. Then the only possible answer is that you have to apply another set of muscles that goes counter to the muscles that are pushing the air out.
Ha ha! Not so fast, eager McBeaver.
That's right, Mr. McBeaver. Let's find out where your missing muscle actually comes from. Imagine for a second that your vocal folds are like hands, clapping. Clap, 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 clap. The rate at which they clap determines the frequency or the pitch. When you sing the note A4, they are coming into contact 440 times per second. It's very quick, but it's not very high if you're a soprano. Now, the amount of time they spend open is called the open quotient, and the amount of time they spend in contact is called the contact quotient. The difference between how long they take to open and how long they take to close again is the skewing quotient. When we sing loud, clear sounds, as the chords open, a small puff of air escapes, and as they close again, the air stops passing through. The more time they spend open, the weaker and more breathy the sound will be. The more time they spend closed, the higher contact quotient makes the sound loud and clear. Now, when you make a clear sound, every puff of air is also going to be smaller. So we spend more time in contact, less time being open, and the closing is quicker than the opening. Now this has an interesting effect. Although we are opening and closing the vocal folds at the same rate, 440 times per second, every puff of air that's released is actually smaller. That's because the folds are spending more time in contact, less time apart, and are coming together more quickly than they are opening. Although it is correct that there is no muscle in the body capable of accomplishing this, it is nonetheless exactly what happens. How? Constriction.
Whoa, what?
That's right. Constriction. The idea that the throat must be open to produce the maximum resonance and that the airflow must therefore be reduced by controlling the forced exhalation is incorrect. The way that the airflow is reduced is in fact power, source, filter, nonlinearity. I have a really strong suspicion that before the larynx was observed in action by a guy named Manuel Garcia almost 200 years ago, great teachers of singing actually understood this aspect of the voice intuitively. They knew what was going on. They just didn't have the same scientific knowledge that we have today. So they imagined that the voice literally came into the body from outside, or that it started in the mouth rather than in the throat. That sounded like ridiculous superstition or crazy talk or anti-scientific ideas to Manuel Garcia.
The two lips of the glottis, which are separated in the act of breathing, meet when preparing to produce a sound, and close the passage with the degree of energy demanded by the nature of the sound and the power with which it is to be emitted. Then, Being pushed upwards by the air, they give way and allow a portion of air to escape, but immediately return to their original contact and recommence the action. These intermittent emissions, or explosions of air, when regular and rapid enough, form a sound. If after every explosion the glottis closes completely, each impinges sharply on the tympanic membrane, and the sound heard is bright or ringing. But if the glottis is imperfectly closed, and a slight escape of air unites the explosions, the impressions upon the tympanum are blunted, the sound being then veiled. The waste of air can be verified by placing a lighted match before the mouth. The brighter sound does not stir the flame. The veiled one will.
Now, you see that flame? Every time you pronounce the letter H correctly, the flame will waver, and every time you drop your H, the flame will remain stationary.
In Hertford, Hereford and Hampshire, hurricanes hardly ever happen.
Oh, no. Have you no ear at all?
I mean, he did invent a device for seeing the larynx in action, and he did prove that the larynx is the source of the vibrations that we hear as the voice. And he did show incontrovertibly that the vocal tract is the filter that turns that buzzing into a clear and pure tone, just the same way that the trumpet turns the buzzing of the lips into the tone that we hear. But Garcia was not 100% right. Maybe something more like 15%. Here's why I would say 15%. The people who lost arguments that they had with Manuel Garcia, they had a concept called Inalare la voce. In English, that translates to inhaling the voice. Now, this idea makes no sense. You can't inhale and exhale at the same time, and clearly the voice starts in the larynx and makes its way out from there. It's not coming in from outside.
Now, when a singer exhales the voice, what they are actually doing is exhaling breath through the mouth out toward the audience.
Correct!
But if you understand source filter nonlinearity, Inalare la voce actually starts to make sense. Now, if 85% of the energy that people produce with their voices when they sing is being reflected back towards the vocal folds and changing the way they vibrate instead of radiating out towards the listener, it makes a whole lot of sense that people who were really good at singing adjusted their vocal tracts, their vowels, and even their posture as if the voice is coming back towards them instead of going out from inside.
Now, in order to inhale the voice, you do the opposite of that. You inhale. Now, this is an actual inhalation of breath, but you don't think of it as breath. You think of it as being your voice or your sound. Now, this inhalation of the voice is the means by which the breath which is going to come out of your lungs is brought out of the lungs in a controlled stream.
Vocal pedagogy had a problem. Science was giving them a linear source filter model. It said the voice comes from the larynx and makes its way out from there. It's filtered by the vocal tract, and that's what produces the sound that we hear. But they also had the old school teachings that talked about things like inhaling the voice. And they had to put these two together. I suspect what happened in the 20th century is that people tried to reconcile old school ideas like inhalare la voce with the science of their time. And the science of their time told them that the voice doesn't come towards you, it goes away from you. It starts at the larynx, it goes through the vocal tract, it's filtered into a sound, and that's what we hear. Put yourself in the shoes of someone like Douglas Stanley, who's writing in the early 20th century. He doesn't want to throw away the old and very successful advice of the great masters who talked about concepts like inhalare la voce. But at the same time, he's got to put that together with the ideas of people like Manuel Garcia, who proved beyond the shadow of a doubt that the larynx is the source of the sound, that the lungs power that source, and that the vocal tract is the filter that turns that source into what we think of as a voice. To make this work, people like him came up with some ideas that really make no sense at all. They literally said you're going to use your inhalation muscles while you're exhaling, and that somehow that's going to be inhaling your voice.
That's why most vocal techniques try to teach you how to conserve breath.
They changed inhalare la voce into actually trying to inhale your voice, like a vacuum cleaner or something.
As if you were continuing to inhale breath, to inhale breath, to inhale breath.
I'll talk more about breathing in a later video, but for now, let's acknowledge something really obvious. You can't inhale and exhale at the same time. In the first lesson in this series, I told you about the three main elements that go into making any technique. Their position, motion, and attitude. And I represent them with this floating tetrahedron, because why not? Today, we're gonna start with the attitude of inhalare la voce and see how this old school concept can be used in new school singing. To try to find this attitude, let's use a little bit of mental imagery. Imagine that your voice is a light that shines towards your face, and that when you open your mouth, you're letting it in. The shape that you make with your terminal opening, or your T number, is going to change the way the light comes into your vocal tract. Imagine the spotlight in the theater. And when the spotlight operator closes the lens, it can shine in a more direct beam directly at an actor. That's a little bit like what's going on here, except we're gonna have some more specific shape. Sort of like putting different filters and lenses on that light. In the simplified version of this system, I only had 7 of these positions, 7 shapes. Now the reason for that, I'm going to be completely honest with you, is that I was once convinced by someone who said they were an old school singer and who convinced me they knew what they were talking about, that I should never show my bottom teeth when I'm singing. Sometimes we get to believing things and it's not so easy to question them because we kind of forgot that we believe them. And the thing to do when you find new information is to change your system. And that's how the more advanced version of this system was born. Instead of having one number for each position to represent the whole shape of the end of your mouth, there's one number for each lip. You can think of the mouth as a circle divided in half, and the upper number will represent the upper half of this circle, and the lower number will represent the lower half of this circle. Otherwise, it functions more or less in the same way. We start with the big 0 position that we had in the simplified system. From there, we can pull the upper lip away from the center of the circle, or pull the lower lip away from the center of the circle. We can push the upper lip towards the middle of the circle, and we can push the lower lip towards the center of the circle. And we can combine those motions any way that we're able to make a new T number. So let's take a look at that original position 0. The new name for this is 0 over 0, or 0/0. Now if I lift my upper lip a little bit, I get to position -1 over 0. But if instead of lifting my upper lip, I pull my lower lip down just a little bit, I get to position 0 over -1. I can do both, and then I have -1 over -1. They can have a similar effect, but in many cases, it's more advantageous to use -1 over 0 or 0 over -1. Now the reason I might choose -1 over 0 as opposed to 0 over -1 can be that one of them is a better position for the sound I'm trying to make, on the pitch I'm trying to make, with the vowel that I'm trying to make. But it could be that one of them is just a better motion. That's really going to depend, and the only way to find this stuff out is to practice. The best way to practice and observe what's going on, other than using the mirror, is to use this inalare la voce idea, inhaling the voice, shining a light at a particular part of my mouth as I move. If I'm moving my tongue, I can think about keeping my tongue in the focus of that light. Or I can think about not putting the focus on my tongue. Whatever I want to do, all I have to remember is that the voice is coming in from outside my body, not out from my larynx. And when I'm manipulating the light that's shining, it's going to start from the terminal opening with the T number. From the 0 over 0 position, this system has 3 negative settings that you can set for each lip, and you can mix and match them to make different shapes. I can have 0 over -3, I can have -3 over 0, I can have -3 over -3. Some positions might be impractical or nearly impossible, and some positions might be ambiguous. And we could argue all day about whether or not something is -2 over -3 or -2 over -2, and it doesn't really matter. The idea here is to organize your positions in a way that's readily accessible to you and that you can write down in your score. If my -3 is your -2, that's fine. What's important is that you're able to do the same thing every time. From 0 over 0, we can also close the circle. We can now hum using +3 over +3, but we could also hum using +3 over -3. If there's a +3 in either the top or the bottom number, your lips are sealed. So why would it matter how we're going to label a hum? Well, think about it for a second. When you make the sound M, your lips are sealed and all the air is coming out of your nose. Now that sound is part of a phrase. You're going to have a particular position when you make that sound. But when you move to the next sound, and when you have a sound before that sound, it's part of a motion. And because of the way positions and motions interact with each other, that's going to change the sound that you get during your phrase. It's going to set you up for one thing that's better or for something that's worse. Now, in the beginner version of this system, I talked about a kind of ventriloquist position called +2. And I showed you an example of myself using it. And I showed you an example of an actual ventriloquist called Darcy Lynn. Using something that looks completely different. We can now give these different names. The one I used is something like -1 over +2, whereas the one Darcy Lynn was using was something more like -3 over +2. Her lower lip comes up into the circle to get close to the upper lip, but her upper lip is retracted very far. In both cases, the one I was using and the one Darcy Lynn was using, the way that the lower lip gets close enough to the upper lip to make this kind of ventriloquist effect is by closing the jaw. So the system isn't only describing the lips. It's kind of like a hybrid between what your jaw is doing and what your lip is doing. And again, just like the simplified version only had 7 postures, because you have to start somewhere and too much information becomes no information at all. This system is also simplified and doesn't really describe everything that's possible. You're still going to have to practice, and you're still going to have to use more than just your lips. The position called +1 in the simplified system is, you guessed it, +1 over +1. Both lips come towards the center of a hypothetical big 0 position, and they make a sort of small oo position. Now again, it's possible to mix and match +1 with other positions. You may not be using a lot of these +1 mixed positions to sing vowels, but they can be useful when you're approaching consonants. It depends on the context of the whole phrase, and it depends on the motion that you're trying to get. For instance, if I make the sound s, s, that sound doesn't change a lot when I move my lips, but it does change, and that's going to change the effect that I get when I release it into a vowel, as well as the actual sound of the S. When you have an S in between 2 vowels, pay attention to what mouth position gets you better result for the vowel before and the vowel after. You might be surprised. It won't be limited to the consonant S, it can apply to any consonant that you're making. And sometimes you may want to use this at the tail end of a vowel or the beginning of a vowel before you move into a bigger shape. By knowing how to write down what works, and by knowing how to cycle through different options in a systematic way, you give yourself the power to find out what works for you, what choices make sense for you. It also gives you the power to watch other singers and to look for clues, and gives you the ability to teach yourself using them as models. Everything I've talked about so far in this video, whether it's position, motion, or attitude, has been a kind of knowledge. But I've also told you that new school singing is based on knowledge, ability, and heart. All 3 of these overlap, and you have to have all 3 in good shape when you practice, when you rehearse, and when you perform. So let's talk a bit about overthinking. This advanced system now has gone from 7 to 49 different positions, and we're only talking about the opening of your mouth. That's a lot of details. You can't be thinking about all this stuff when you actually get up to sing. It's important knowledge to have, but if you're focused on it all the time, your singing is going to be kind of dead. If you do manage to be smart enough to always be on top of this stuff, it might turn out robotic. Or maybe you'll be making so many calculations all the time that you're completely distracted. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. You do not need to think about something that's already working. That means that you don't need to worry about what T number you're using when everything is going smoothly. Focus on your audience, focus on the text, focus on anything else. Or even, I know this sounds crazy, enjoy yourself.
That's crazy talk.
No, it's true.
But don't be surprised either if something that you're used to never having to think about one day suddenly stops working. All the techniques that you have, all the skill that you have as a singer is really just a castle made of sand. And it's a castle made of sand that you built close to the ocean. At some point the tide is going to come in, or enough time is going to go by, and your sandcastle is going to start looking pretty lumpy and disorganized, no matter how well you built it. Now, assuming you don't react by becoming a voice teacher and trying to convince everyone that your sandcastle is still as beautiful as it was in the old days, you're going to have 2 choices. Your first choice is to be frustrated and disappointed And your second choice is to get to work making a new castle. You got into this because you enjoyed making a sandcastle at least once. You can enjoy doing it again. If you've practiced this rebuilding process before the circumstances of your life forced you to, you're gonna have a much easier time doing it when you don't have a choice. It's gonna be a lot less frustrating. The more you know about the details of how you built your first sandcastle, the better job you're gonna do building your next one. But that kind of loops us around and brings us back to this problem of overthinking. It's another chicken and egg. There's a metaphor I like to use to help me manage these competing attitudes. One attitude is the focus on details, and the other is the big picture. I call it the line in the sand. So imagine we're at the beach and we draw a line in the sand. On one side is all the details. It's your way. It's all the techniques that you use and exactly when to use them and how to use them. On the other side is just the big picture. How to be in the moment, how to communicate with others, and how to just enjoy yourself. When it's time to practice, think about the details. But when it's time to perform and all your details have been prepared, it's important to get out of your own way. Every time you cross that line in the sand, it's going to start to get blurry. It's going to be important for you to remake this line. The more you can adjust your general attitude to one of expecting to do things over and even enjoying it, the better off you're going to be, and the better you're going to be at doing everything you need to do to stay consistent. But if you have the opposite attitude, an attitude that expects your accomplishments to last forever, you're either going to go into denial or you're going to get frustrated. So thanks for watching this new school singing tutorial. I hope you find it useful. If you do, please subscribe and ring the bell so you get notifications about my future videos. I've been a bit busy with rehearsals and performances here, so sorry, not sorry, about taking a while to make these videos. They take a lot of effort and time, and well, that's just the way it is. You can also feel free to click on the link in the video description for other ways you can support this channel, like sending me money. See you next time.